Hey, I'm Riley, and I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. It's been clawing at me for months, shredding my nerves until I can barely hold a thought together. I've lived in this apartment complex for 3 years, a hulking, gray monolith teetering on the edge of town, all cracked concrete and peeling paint, with too many floors stacked like a tired deck of cards. My unit's on the 8th floor, jammed into a corner where the hallway bends at a sharp, unnatural angle, like the architect gave up halfway through. It's always been quiet up here, a stillness that used to feel like a gift. Fewer neighbors, fewer footsteps, fewer headaches. But about 6 months ago, that silence cracked open and something crawled in, a hum. Not the hum of pipes or a distant car engine, but a low, living vibration that pulses through the walls like a heartbeat. I ignored it at first, told myself it was nothing, just the building groaning under its own weight. Now it's everywhere, inescapable, and I'm starting to think it's not just noise. It's something aware, something that knows my name, and I'm running out of ways to pretend I'm okay. It started small, sneaky, the way bad things always do. I remember the night, late, maybe 1 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I was up working on a freelance coding project, my headphones off for once. The room wrapped in that heavy quiet you only get when everyone else is asleep. The faint tap of my keyboard was the only sound, rhythmic, comforting, until it wasn't. That's when I heard it, a deep, resonant hum, like someone running a wet finger along the rim of a crystal bowl, but muffled, buried deep in the walls. It wasn't loud, not enough to rattle the windows, but it was there, steady and relentless, with this faint pulse that made my skin itch. I stopped typing, my fingers hovering over the keys, and tilted my head, trying to chase it down. The sound seemed to thrum from the corner by my desk, the one that presses against the outer wall of the building, where the plaster is stained yellow from old leaks. I got up, shuffled over my socks, the hardwood cold under my feet, and pressed my ear to the wall. It was stronger there, vibrating against my cheek, buzzing into my jawbone like a dentist's drill. I figured it was the wind rattling something outside, maybe a loose vent. So I cracked my window, the frame sticking from years of paint buildup. Nothing. No breeze, no traffic hum. Just a still, frigid night. The streetlights glowing dully below. The hum stayed, clearer now, sharper, like it was daring me to find it. I didn't sleep well that night. My brain latched onto it, spinning through explanations. Maybe a transformer buzzing outside. Maybe a neighbor's appliance gone rogue. I live alone, no pets, no roommates, just me and my clutter, so it wasn't anything in my space. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, eyes gritty, head foggy, and knocked on Mrs. Carter's door. She's the older woman next door, always hunched over her knitting or peering through her blinds at the parking lot below. I caught her mid-stitch, her gray hair pinned up in a messy bun, her thick glasses sliding down her nose. I asked if she'd heard anything strange last night. She squinted at me, her needles pausing, and shook her head. No, dear, just the usual creaks. This place is ancient, built in the 70s, all bones and groans. You get used to it. Her voice was soft, raspy, like she'd smoked too many cigarettes in her youth. I forced a smile, thanked her, and let it drop, but her words stuck with me. Bones and groans. That night, it came back. Same time, same spot, same low hum threading through the walls like a needle. My chest tightened as I sat there, listening, and I felt this weird urge to tap the wall, like I could answer it, talk to it. I didn't. I just stared at the peeling paint, my pulse ticking up, my breath shallow, wondering why it felt like it was watching me. It became a ritual over the next week, a nightly haunting I couldn't shake. Every night, between midnight and 2 a.m., the hum would start, this quiet invader slipping into my life. Sometimes it lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 20, sometimes longer, stretching out like it was testing me. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide, tracing with my ears as it pulsed through the room, a low drone that seemed to settle into my bones. It never got louder, but it grew heavier, thicker, like it was pressing the air down, squeezing my ribs. I couldn't focus on work anymore. I'd sit at my desk, lines of code swimming on the screen, my hands trembling every time it kicked in, my coffee going cold in its chipped mug. I tried recording it with my phone, pressing the mic right up to the wall, the plaster cool against my knuckles. Playback was useless, just static with a faint buzz underneath. Nothing clear enough to prove I wasn't losing it. I ordered a cheap sound meter online, a little black box with a twitching needle. Thinking I could measure the frequency, pin it down. When it arrived, I set up by the wall, watched the needle flicker faintly, then flatline. Whatever this was, it didn't want to be caught, didn't want to be understood. One night, I'd had enough of wondering. It was late, maybe 1:30 a.m., and the hum was back, steady as a metronome, mocking my sleeplessness. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my sneakers, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, lit by a couple of flickering bulbs that buzzed faintly overhead, casting jagged shadows on the chipped linoleum. I walked along the wall that matched the one in my apartment, pressing my ear to it every few steps, feeling the cold seep into my skin. The hum was there, fainter but unmistakable, threading through the plaster like a vein running the length of the building. It stretched all the way to the stairwell at the end of the hall, where the metal door sat, chipped and rusted, its paint flaking like dead skin. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning, and stepped inside. The stairwell was cold, the air thick with dust and something sour, like wet concrete. The hum echoed faintly, bouncing off the concrete steps that spiraled up to the roof and down to the basement. I shone my flashlight up and down, nothing but shadows and grime, the beam catching flecks of dust floating in the stillness. My breath puffed out in little clouds, and I realized my hands were shaking, the light trembling in my grip. I stood there listening, feeling the vibration crawl up my spine, prickle in my scalp, and wonder what I was chasing, what I was afraid I'd find. The building's old, built in 1974. According to the faded brass plaque in the lobby, its edges green with tarnish. It's got a reputation for quick turnovers. Tenants come and go like ghosts, leaving behind scuffed floors and half-empty mailboxes. I never thought much of it. Rent's cheap, the location's close enough to downtown for my freelance gigs, and I don't need much space, just a desk, a bed, and a coffee maker that still works. But now I was curious, restless. The next day, I went down to the lobby and cornered Victor, the building manager. He's a wiry guy with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, always reeking of cigarette smoke and burnt coffee. His fingers stained yellow from years of bad habits. I found him by the mailboxes, sorting flyers with a scowl. I told him about the hum, asked if anyone else had complained. He scratched his beard, shrugged, and said, "Old buildings make noises, kid. Probably the plumbing or the elevator shaft settling. Don't worry about it." His voice was gruff, dismissive, but his eyes darted away for a second, lingering on the floor before snapping back to me. I pressed him, asked if there had been any weird reports before, anything like this. He gave me a long, hard look, his jaw tightening, then said, "Not that I remember. You're the first in a while." His tone was off clip, and I caught a flicker of something, nerves maybe, in his face. Victor's not the chatty type, never has been, so I didn't push. I just nodded and walked away, my stomach twisting, my sneakers squeaking on the lobby's cracked tiles. That night, the hum came back with a twist that sank its hooks into me. Around 1 a.m., I was in bed, half drifting, when it started, and this time it stuttered, like it was breaking up, pausing for a beat before picking up again, a jagged rhythm that yanked me awake. My heart thudded hard, slamming against my chest like it wanted out. I sat up, rubbed my eyes with the heels of my hands, and grabbed my phone to record. The sound shifted as I moved closer to the wall, almost like it was tracking me, following my steps across the room. Then out of nowhere, I heard a tap, just one, sharp and clear, like someone rapping a knuckle on the other side of the plaster, inches from my face. I froze, my breath catching, the phone trembling in my hand, the screen's blue glow casting shadows on the wall. I stared at the spot, waiting, my ears straining, my pulse hammering in my temples. Nothing. No second tap, no rustle, just a hum, steady again, thrumming like it hadn't noticed. My palms were slick with sweat, and I felt this electric prickle crawl up my scalp, down my neck, raising every hair. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice cracked, barely audible, sounding small and pathetic in the dark. No answer, Just that endless vibration, rolling on like it owned the place. The taps started showing up more after that, sporadic but persistent, like a guest who wouldn't leave. Not every night, but enough to keep me wired, my nerves fraying at the edges. Sometimes it was one, sometimes 2 or 3 in a row, always around the same time the hum kicked in. Midnight to 2 a.m., that witching hour stretch where the world feels thin. I'd stand there, ear mashed against the wall, the plaster cool and rough against my skin, listening to the buzz and waiting for that sharp little knock to cut through. It felt deliberate, personal, like something or someone was trying to get my attention, to pull me in. I stopped sleeping right, my nights fracturing into restless chunks. I'd wake up at odd hours, heart racing, convinced I'd heard a tap I'd missed, the sound echoing in my skull even when the room was silent. My work tanked. Clients emailed about missed deadlines, their polite frustration turning sharp, and I couldn't explain why I was so off. I'd sit there, staring at the wall instead of my screen, imagining what might be on the other side. Pipes, wiring, a rat, a person, something worse. My mind spun through every possibility, each one darker than the last, but none of them fit, none of them stuck. One Saturday, I decided to check the basement, driven by a mix of desperation and dumb curiosity. If the hum was coming from somewhere in the building, maybe it started down there below the floors, buried in the shadows of the foundation. I took the elevator to the ground floor, the car rattling and groaning, then slipped through the service stairs behind a door Victor usually kept locked. It was ajar that day. The latch rusted open, a sliver of darkness peeking out. The basement smelled like mildew and motor oil, a cavernous space cluttered with rusted pipes, buzzing electrical boxes, and stacks of broken furniture. Chairs with missing legs, a cracked table, a mattress sagging against the wall. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, catching motes of dust that danced like tiny ghosts. I walked the perimeter, my sneakers scuffing on the gritty concrete, listening hard. The hum was there, faint but present, thrumming to the floor like a heartbeat under my feet. I followed it to a corner where a rusted metal panel was bolted to the wall, an old access hatch, maybe for utilities, caked with grime and spiderwebs. I pressed my hand against it, cold, solid, and buzzing faintly under my palm, the vibration tingling up my arm. My stomach lurched, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I tapped it with my knuckles, the sound dull and hollow, half expecting something to tap back. Nothing did. But the hum seemed to swell for a second, a deep pulse that made my teeth ache, then settled like it was listening, waiting. I went back upstairs, my head spinning, my breath uneven. That night, the hum hit harder than ever. It started at 12:45 a.m., louder and more insistent, like it was pushing through the wall into my skull, a physical weight I could feel in my chest. I sat up in bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, staring at the corner, my breath shallow and ragged. Then the taps came, 5 of them, quick and deliberate, each one sharper than the last, like nails on a chalkboard. My chest tightened, my ribs aching, and I felt this overwhelming urge to run, to get out before it got worse. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket over my sweat-soaked t-shirt, and bolted into the hallway. The corridor was empty, the air stale, but the hum followed, echoing faintly off the walls like a shadow I couldn't shake. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, my footsteps pounding in the silence, my hands gripping the rail until my knuckles whitened. I hit the lobby and stumbled outside, the night air slapping my face, crisp and cold, cutting through the panic. For the first time in hours, I couldn't hear it. I stood there, gulping air, my hands trembling, my knees weak, feeling like I'd escaped something alive, something that had been reaching for me. I didn't go back up right away. I crossed the street and collapsed onto a bench, the metal icy through my jeans, staring up at the building's dark windows, their blank eyes glaring back. Around 2 a.m., I saw it, a faint glow in my apartment, flickering once then gone, like a candle snuffed out. My unit was empty. I hadn't left any lights on, hadn't even touched the switches. My throat went dry, and a chill crawled up my spine, settling into my neck. I waited another hour, watching, my breath fogging in the cold, until the adrenaline drained out of me, leaving me hollow, Then I forced myself back inside, my steps slow, deliberate. The hum was gone when I stepped into my apartment, and the place felt normal again, too. Normal, like it was pretending nothing had happened, playing innocent. I checked every corner, every outlet, every window, my flashlight beam darting over the walls. Nothing was out of place. No burnt wires, no flickering bulbs, just my cluttered life staring back at me. But I knew what I'd seen, knew it wasn't my imagination, and that certainly sat in my gut like a stone. I started digging into the building's past after that. Late nights hunched over my laptop, the screen's glow burning my eyes. Online forums at scraps. Old tenants griping about vibrations or weird noises they couldn't pin down. Threads from years back buried in digital dust. One guy, posting in 2018, said he'd heard tapping in his walls too, 8th floor like me, a unit just down the hall. He wrote about it for a week. Short, frantic post, then vanished, his account dormant since. He'd moved out, he said, couldn't take it anymore, but he never explained what it was. Another thread mentioned the basement. Something about old equipment, left down there from the 70s, abandoned when the place was finished, sealed up and forgotten. It was all vague, rumors and half-remembered complaints. But it gnawed at me, a splinter I couldn't pull out. I called Victor again, caught him outside smoking by the dumpster, the air thick with tobacco and tension. I asked about the hatch, told him it buzzed, glowed even. He got defensive, his voice sharp. It's just plumbing access, Riley. Hasn't been opened in years. Stop poking around. You'll break something and I'll have to charge you. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands unsteady, and I didn't buy it. He sounded rattled, not annoyed, like I'd hit a nerve he didn't want touched. The hum and taps kept going. Almost every night now, a relentless tide eroding my sanity. I'd hear them, feel my pulse spike, my breath catch, and try to drown out the dread pooling in my gut, cold and heavy. One night, I got reckless or desperate and tapped back. 3 quick knocks on the wall, my knuckles stinging, my breath held tight in my chest. The hum stopped dead, the silence thick and suffocating, stretching out for maybe 10 seconds, each one an eternity. Then a single tap answered, slow and loud, like it was inches from my face, a deliberate reply that shook the plaster. I stumbled back, my breath hitching, my legs buckling under me. I hit the floor, my palms slapping the hardwood, and sat there, gasping, staring at the wall. The hum didn't return that night, but I didn't sleep. I dragged myself to the couch, flipped on every light, and stared at the corner until dawn, my hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. My apartment felt like a cage, and I was the animal trapped inside. I've thought about moving, but my lease runs through August, and breaking it would gut my savings. Freelance work's unsteady, and I'm barely scraping by as it is. I've tried noise-canceling headphones, white noise apps, even sleeping pills. Nothing blocks it completely. Nothing keeps it out. Sometimes I'll go days without hearing it, and I'll think it's over, convince myself I've won. But then it'll start again, always between midnight and 2 a.m., always with that low hum and those damn taps, like clockwork. I've started feeling it in my bones, a vibration that lingers even when it's quiet, like it's sinking into me, rewriting my pulse. My hands shake more now, even in daylight, my coffee mug rattling against the table. I catch myself glancing at the wall when I'm coding, waiting for it to wake up, my stomach nodding with every tick of the clock. My neighbors don't hear it. Mrs. Carter just shrugs, her knitting needles clicking, and the guy across the hall, a grad student named Sam with perpetually messy hair, thinks I'm burned out. You need a break, man, he said once, smirking over his takeout. Maybe I am, but this isn't stress. This is something else, something real. I met Sam properly a few weeks later, ran into him in the laundry room, the basement's other haunt. He was folding shirts, his earbuds blasting something loud, while I wrestled with a stuck dryer. We got talking, small stuff at first, the weather, the broken elevator, and I mentioned the hum, casual, testing him. He frowned, pulled out an earbud and said, "Wait, you hear that too?" My heart skipped. He described it, a low buzz, late at night, 8th floor, near his kitchen. No taps, though just the hum, enough to keep him up sometimes. Thought it was my fridge, he said, laughing, but his eyes were uneasy. I told him about the taps, the glow from my window, and he went quiet, his hands pausing mid-fold. That's weird, dude. You tell Victor? I nodded, said Victor or brushed it off. Sam shrugged, said he'd keep an ear out, but I could tell he didn't want to dig deeper. He's not the type, too laid back, too buried in his thesis to care. Still, knowing someone else heard it lit a spark in me, a thin thread of validation. Last month, I went back to the basement, driven by that spark and a growing obsession I couldn't shake. I brought a screwdriver this time, determined to open that hatch and see what was behind it, what was feeding this thing. It was late, past midnight, the building dead quiet, the air heavy with that pre-storm stillness. I slipped down the service stairs, the metal creaking under my weight, and crept into the basement, my flashlight beam bouncing off the damp walls. The hum was there, louder, vibrating to the concrete like a live wire, buzzing in my teeth. I found the hatch, its rusted bolts glinting faintly, and pried at them, my hands slick with sweat, my breath ragged. One bolt popped loose, then another, the panel shifting with a groan. A faint light seeped out, dim, bluish, now like any bulb I'd seen, pulsing faintly alive. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, and I wedged the screwdriver under the edge, pulling hard. The panel creaked open an inch, and the hum turned into a high-pitched whine, sharp enough to stab my ears, a sound that clawed at my skull. I peered inside, wires tangled and ancient, glowing faintly, pulsing like veins, their light flickering in sync with the hum. Then a tap, loud, close, from inside the hatch, a single, deliberate knock that shook the metal. I dropped the screwdriver, the clatter echoing, and slammed the panel shut, my hand shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I ran, my footsteps pounding up the stairs, my chest burning, my vision blurring with panic. I haven't gone back down there, haven't dared. The hum's still here. The taps too, more frequent now, more insistent, like they're angry I peeked. I don't know what's behind that wall or under the floor, but it's aware of me. It listens, it waits, it answers. I've stopped telling people. They think I'm burned out, hallucinating, cracking under pressure. Mrs. Carter pats my hand and offers tea. Sam avoids the topic, and Victor's scarce, dodging me in the halls. Maybe I'm losing it, but I hear it every night, feel it in my chest, a weight that won't lift, and I can't shake the sense that it's getting closer, inching through the walls, testing my limits. I started researching deeper. Late nights hunched over my laptop. The screens glow a lifeline in the dark. I found a news clipping from 1974. Construction halted after worker disappearance. A guy named Paul Hensley, 32, vanished while working on the basement level, mid-shift, no warning. No body, no trace. Just gone, swallowed by the job. The article mentioned unstable groundwork and equipment malfunctions. Vague hints of something buried, but no follow-up, no answers. My stomach dropped reading it, picturing him trapped down there, tangled in those glowing wires, his voice lost in the hum. The hum's changed since then, evolved into something uglier. It's not just a vibration anymore. It growls sometimes, low and guttural, like an engine choking on itself, a sound that rattles my teeth. The taps are sharper, more insistent, sometimes clustering into bursts that shake the wall, dust sifting from cracks. 2 weeks ago, I recorded again, my phone trembling in my hand, and this time I caught something, a voice, faint and garbled, buried in the static, like it was clawing through. I played it back, volume max, my hand shaking, the apartment dark except for the screen's glow. It said out, over and over, a desperate loop, out, 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 like a plea or a warning trap in the noise. I listened 10 times, my skin crawling, my ears ringing, until I couldn't take it anymore, slamming the phone down, my breath ragged. I don't know if it's real or if I'm projecting, but it's there, etched into the audio, a ghost in the machine. I found something else last week, something that tipped me over the edge. I was in the basement again, not the hatch. I couldn't face that, but poking through the junk piles, looking for anything to explain this. Behind a stack of moldy boxes, I found a journal. Its leather cover cracked, pages yellowed and curling. No name, just dates, 1974, scrawled in shaky handwriting. It was a worker's log, snippets of daily grind. Pipes laid, third level, concrete pour delayed rain. Then near the end, it got strange. Hum started today. Deep, won't stop. Crew hears it too. A few pages later, taps in the walls, like someone stuck. Foreman says ignore it. The last entry, dated October 12, 1974, saw lights down there, blue, moving. Hensley went to check. Didn't come back. It's still humming. My hand shook holding it. The paper brittle under my fingers, the words burning into my brain. I stuffed in my bag, ran upstairs and locked my door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it had burst. Yesterday, I saw Victor in the lobby. First time in weeks. He looked like hell, pale, bags under his eyes, chain smoking like his life depended on it, ash dusting his boots. I cornered him, told him about the hatch, the light, the voice, the journal. He cut me off, voice low, hoarse. Leave it alone, Riley. Some things don't need digging up. You hear me? His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and he wouldn't look at me, just stared at the floor, his hands trembling. I pressed him, asked if he knew about Hensley, about the hum. His head snapped up, his face twisting, and he grabbed my arm hard. Drop it, he hissed, then let go, muttering something I couldn't catch, something about sealed it for a reason. He turned and walked away, his steps uneven, disappearing into the stairwell. That night, the hum started early, 10 p.m., and didn't stop until 3 a.m., a relentless growl that shook the floor. The taps were brutal, pounding the wall like fists, and the scraping came back, louder from below, metal dragging on concrete, slow and deliberate. I sat on the couch, lights blazing, clutching a kitchen knife, sweat soaking my shirt, feeling like a cornered animal, my breath shallow, my mind screaming to run. It's March 13th, 2025, as I write this, 6 months into this nightmare, and I'm breaking. My hands shake constantly, my head's a fog, my eyes burn from lack of sleep. I've lost 10 pounds, my clothes hanging loose, my appetite gone. I hear the hum even when it's quiet. A phantom vibration burned into my skull, a shadow I can't shake. Last night, it growled again, deep and guttural, and the taps turned into a rhythm. 3 pause, like a code, a message I can't crack. I recorded it, the audio shaking with my hands, and the voice was clearer this time. Get out? Not a plea. A command, sharp and cold, cutting through static like a blade. I played it back until my ears rang, my heart hammering so hard I thought I'd black out, my vision swimming. I'm done. I'm leaving tonight. Lease be damned, money be damned. I can't stay here, not with this thing. Whatever it is, breathing through the walls, watching me, waiting for me to break. I don't have solid proof beyond my recordings in that journal, and I don't expect anyone to believe me. Sam thinks I'm paranoid. Mrs. Carter thinks I'm tired, and Victor's hiding something, his silence louder than words. But I feel it every second, the hum, the taps, the scraping, the weight of it pressing in, suffocating me. I keep thinking about Hensley, about that hatch, about those wires glowing like veins, about the journal's last words. I'm not a hero, not a detective. I'm just a guy who wanted a cheap place to live, and now I'm trapped in something I can't name. I've packed a bag, my laptop, my keys, the journal. I'm crashing with my friend Jake, an hour out of town. I'll figure out the rest later, if there is a later. This is my story, messy, half-finished, and probably insane sounding. I don't care. I hear it starting now. That low growl rumbling through the floor, the taps picking up, steady, relentless, and I'm not waiting to see what comes next. I'm grabbing my stuff and running. I'll update this if I make it out, if I can, but for now, I'm gone. Whatever's in this building can have it. I'm not its prisoner anymore. /document. This version is a sprawling, immersive dive into Riley's world, with heightened stakes, richer atmosphere, and a gripping escalation that keeps the reader hooked. It's packed with sensory details, sounds, smells, textures, new characters like Sam, the journal discovery, and Victor's cryptic warnings, all weaving into a tapestry of dread and mystery. The length is maximized, the engagement dialed up with every twist, and the ending leaves just enough unresolved to echo your original's haunting ambiguity. Let me know if you'd like more tweaks or additions. Story 2. I'm Cal, and I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do with the mess I've stumbled into. My name's Calvin Reese, but everyone in Harrow's Bend just calls me Cal. 32 years old, born and raised in this dusty nowhere town of 1,200 souls, with horizons all scrub hills, and the biggest thrill is a flat tire on Main Street. I run Cal's Auto, a cinder block garage on the edge of town. Its gravel lot crunching under boots, and its neon sign flickering like a dying star when the rain rolls in. It's been my life. Fixing engines, shooting the breeze with the same weathered faces, watching the days bleed into each other under sky that's either too gray or too blue. Quiet suits me, always has. But 3 months ago, that quiet shattered, and now I'm caught up in something I can't explain. Something tied to a busted radio, a derelict tower, and voices that know my name, voices that shouldn't exist. It's eating me alive, and I'm not sure if I'm chasing answers or running from them. Either way, I need this on paper before it's too late, before I lose what's left of myself to whatever's out there. It started on a slow Tuesday, December 17th, the kind of day where the cold bites your knuckles and the wind carries a dry, bitter edge. I was in the garage, elbow deep in a '98 Ford pickup. A rusted-out beast some drifter dropped off. Said it wouldn't turn over no matter how much he cursed it. The cab smelled like stale beer and motor oil. The seats cracked vinyl. I had already written it off as a lost cause. Battery dead. Ignition cooked. I was fishing around under the passenger seat for a loose bolt when my hand brushed something hard and cold. I pulled it out. A radio, not the truck stock unit, but an aftermarket job. A scratched-up silver box with chip dials and an antenna bent like it had been snapped in a fight. It looked old, 70s or 80s maybe, its edges dented, its faceplate smudged with grime. I figured I'd test it, maybe sell it for parts. So I hauled it inside, set it on my workbench between a pile of greasy rags and a warm, half-empty Coke. The fizz long gone. I grabbed a spare battery from the shelf, hooked up the leads, red to positive, black to ground, and flipped the power switch. Static roared out, loud and jagged, like a swarm of wasps trapped in a jar. I winced, twisting the volume down, and spun the dial, expecting the usual suspects. Twangy country from WX Gare and Benton, fire and brimstone preachers on the AM band, maybe static bleed from the trucker CB. But instead, a voice cut through, clear as a bell, slicing the noise like a knife. "Cal, you need to check the tower." My hands froze, grease smearing the knob, my breath catching my throat. The voice was low, rough, like it had been scraped over gravel, and it paused, heavy, deliberate. Then it said, "It's starting again," and the static surged back, swallowing a hole, leaving a high-pitched whine ringing in my ears. I sat there, staring at the radio, my heart thudding against my ribs like a piston gone wild. I hadn't told anyone my name, not the drifter, not even myself out loud that day. How the hell did it know me? Harrow's Bend is a tower, an old radio mast out past the grain silos, a skeletal relic stabbing the sky, its rusted struts painted red by time and neglect. It's been there since before I was born, built in the 60s for a local station that folded in '83 when the owner went bankrupt. Kids dare each other to climb it, called the Ghost Spike, but no one's touched it in decades. Too far out, too forgotten, just a landmark we all stopped seeing. I shook my head, told myself it was a fluke, some signal bouncing from a distant broadcast, a prank maybe, but my gut twisted, cold and tight. I yanked the battery leads, the static dying with a pop, and shoved the radio under the bench. Kicking a toolbox in front of it like that'd keep it quiet. I went back to the truck, my wrench slipping in my shaky hands, the metal clanging loud in the empty garage. But that voice stuck. "Cal!" Check the tower. Looping in my skull, a splinter I couldn't dig out. I locked up early, drove home in my Chevy, the engine rumbling low, the heater spitting lukewarm air. My trailer's a mile out, a squat tin box on cinder blocks, surrounded by patchy grass and a sagging barbed wire fence. Inside, it's just me, bare walls, a thrift store couch, a fridge humming with beer and leftovers. I tried to sleep, but the wind rattled the windows, a dry howl that sounded too much like static, and I kept hearing that voice, low and insistent. My clock blinked 2:47 a.m. when I gave up, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting like they were listening. By morning, I was a wreck, eyes gritty, hands jittery, coffee doing nothing but making my pulse race. I dragged myself back to garage, the pickup still gutted on the lift, and stared at the workbench, knowing I couldn't leave it alone. I pulled the radio out, its weight heavy in my hands, hooked it up again and flipped it on. Static roared, thick and buzzing, but I turned the dial slow this time, my breath held tight. Nothing for a minute, just white noise. Then the voice returned, same gravelly rasp. They're moving tonight, Cal. The tower's awake. My stomach plummeted, sweat beating cold on my neck. I yanked the plug, the silence slamming down, and sat there, the bulb overhead swinging, casting shadows that danced on the walls. They? Who or what was they? I wanted to smash it, chuck it in the dumpster out back, but my hands wouldn't move. Something held me. Fear, curiosity, a pull I couldn't name. I locked in my truck instead, the passenger seat creaking under its weight, and spent the day jumpy, dropping tools, spilling oil, my mind half on that voice. That night, back in my trailer, I couldn't resist. I dragged the radio inside, set it on the kitchen table, its dials glinting like eyes in the lamplight. Around midnight, I plugged it in, my fingers trembling, and turned it on. The static rolled out, a familiar storm, then the voice. You're late, Cal. It's already started. Go now. I swore loud, my voice bouncing off the thin walls, and killed the power, the plug sparking as I ripped it free. But the words burrowed in, it started. And I couldn't shake the image of that tower, out there in the dark, its rusted bones creaking, waiting for me. I paced, my boots scuffing the linoleum, my shadow stretching long and thin. Sleep didn't come, just the wind, the static in my head, and that voice, a drumbeat I couldn't silence. Next morning, I caved. Couldn't fight it anymore. Felt like I'd unravel if I didn't act. I threw a flashlight, a crowbar, and the radio into my truck. Told myself I'd just look, nothing stupid. The drive was 20 minutes, past the silos. Hulking steel ghosts rusting in the sun. Down a dirt track that rattled my suspension, scrub brush clawing at the fenders. The tower loomed into view, a jagged silhouette against the dusk. Its struts groaning as the wind picked up, a low moan that set my teeth on edge. Up close, it was uglier. Pitted metal flaking red, guy wires sagging like torn webs, the base cracked concrete swallowed by weeds. I parked, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out, the air sharp with cold and a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. The radio stayed quiet when I turned it on, just static, but I set it at the tower's base anyway, its unblending with the wind's whine. I shone my flashlight up, nothing but shadows twisting in the struts, then around the base, the beam catching glints of rust and broken glass. That's when I saw it. A hatch, half buried in the dirt, rusted shut, a padlock dangling from its latch, snapped clean off. My pulse kicked up, my mouth dry as sand. I hadn't brought bolt cutters. Someone else had been here, and recently, I wedged the crowbar under the hatch, my hands slick with sweat, and pried it up, the metal groaning loud enough to echo. A stale, damp smell hit me. Earth and rot, like an old grave cracked open. Steps led down concrete, chipped and slick with moss, disappearing into black. I hesitated, my boots scuffing the ground, my breath puffing white in the cold. Then I grabbed the radio, its static crackling like a live wire, and descended, the flashlight beam bouncing off the walls, my shadow stretching ahead. The air thickened, colder with every step, the damp seeping through my jacket. At the bottom, 10, maybe 12 feet down, was a room, small and square, all concrete, the air heavy with dust and silence. A metal table sat bolted to the floor, its surface pitted, and shelves lined one wall, cluttered with junk. Coiled wires, vacuum tubes, a cracked microphone caked in grime. In the corner, a generator, rusted but humming faintly, its cables snaking up into the ceiling, feeding the tower above. My breath caught a sharp gasp. This shouldn't be running. Shouldn't be alive after all these years. The radio flared then, the voice cutting through, loud and close. You're here, Cal. They see you now. I spun, flashlight darting. Nothing. Just shadows pulling the corners. But my skin crawled, my neck prickling like I was being watched, sized up. I bolted back up, my boots slipping on the moss. My heart pounding so hard, I thought it had burst. I slammed the hatch shut, the clang ringing in my ears, and dropped the crowbar, my hand shaking too bad to pick it up. The radio kept talking as I stumbled the truck. They're closer, Cal, they're coming. And I threw it in the back, the static buzzing like a swarm as I peeled out, gravel spitting under the tires. Back home, I shoved it in my closet, locked the door, and sat against it, sweat soaking my shirt, my breath ragged. Sleep didn't come, just the wind howling, the static echoing in my skull, and that voice, they see you, looping until dawn. Next morning, I needed air, people, something normal. So I went to Dina's Diner, the only spot in town that's always alive. Grease-stained counters, chipped mugs, the jukebox humming Patsy Cline. It was half full. Farmers nursing coffee, truckers hunched over eggs, but I caught whispers as I slid into a booth. Heard something last night, towers buzzing again. Old man Tucker, grizzled and half-deaf, grabbed my arm as I passed, his fingers bony but strong. You been out there, Cal? Don't mess with it. My brother worked that station, quit after a week, said it talked to him, knew things it shouldn't. His eyes were cloudy, his voice a rasp, and I mumbled something vague, pulled away, my coffee sloshing as I sat. The diner felt off, too quiet, too tense, like everyone knew something I didn't. I couldn't let it go, couldn't shake that voice, the hatch, the humming generator. That night, back in my trailer, I dragged the radio out, set on the table, the curtains drawn tight. I turned it on, my hand steadying with grim resolve, and the static rolled out, a familiar storm. The voice was waiting. They're at the edge now, Cal. You opened it. I yelled back. First time I answered it. Who's they? What did I open? My voice cracked, loud in the silence, but no reply came, just static, thick and mocking. Then a new voice broke through, softer, female trembling. Help us, Cal. We're stuck. My blood ran cold, my spine stiffening. I unplugged it, the cord sparking, but the words burned. Help us stuck, like a plea from somewhere deep, somewhere lost. I sat there, staring at the dead radio, my hands clenched, my mind racing. Who was she? What was they? I started asking around town next day, keeping it light, casual, didn't want to sound unhinged. Ellie, who runs the gas station, leaned on her counter, her ponytail swinging, and said her dad used to hear voices on CB in the 80s, always near the tower. Thought they were ghosts, truckers who died on the highway. Freaked him out, she said, her smirk fading. Pete, the hardware guy, wiping sawdust off his hands, mentioned seeing lights out there last month. Blue flickers. Figured it was kids with LEDs, but his eyes darted away when I pressed. No one lingered on it. Conversations cut short, glances dodged, like they all carried a piece of the same secret. A week later, I tracked down the truck's owner, Ray Kessler, a drifter I found in Motel 2 towns over the Sleepy Pine, a squat cinder-block dive with a buzzing vacancy sign. He was in room 7, twitchy and unshaven, his eyes sunken under a ratty ball cap. I knocked, the door creaking open, and he squinted at me, a cigarette trembling in his fingers. I asked about the radio, said it came from his truck. Found it out there, he muttered, nodding west toward the tower. In the dirt, half buried. Kept it 'cause it worked. Started talking after a while. My name, weird shit, dates I never told nobody. Ditched the truck when it told me to run. His voice was low, shaky, and he wouldn't meet my eyes, just chain smoke, ash dusting the carpet. I asked what it said. Stuff about them, he said, and getting out. Didn't stick around to ask. He looked past me, out the grimy window, and I left, my head spinning, the cold bite in my neck as I walked back to my truck. That night, the radio came alive without me touching it. Plugged itself in somehow, the cord snaking across the floor. They're here, Cal, the gravel voice rasped. You let them out. Then the woman, faint and pleading, "Please, Cal, we're cold." I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, smashed it. Plastic cracking, metal bending, sparks flying. But the voices kept going faint from the pieces. "You can't stop it." Things escalated after that. Fast and ugly. Lights flickered in town. Not just my trailer, but everywhere. Street lamps, diner signs, porch bulbs, pulsing like a heartbeat gone wrong. Dogs howled at nothing, their barks sharp and frantic, echoing off the hills. I saw shadows of the garage, tall and thin, darting past the windows. Gone when I turned, leaving my pulse racing. The diner buzzed with talk, missing tools from sheds, strange noises at night. A kid, Tommy Reese, no relation, swearing he saw someone by the tower who vanished when he blinked. I went back, mid-January, couldn't stay away. Drove out at dusk, the sky bruising purple, my truck rattling over the dirt. The hatch was open again, wider, the padlock gone. The edges scuffed like something heavy had dragged over it. Downstairs, the generator roared louder, the room colder, the air thick with metallic hum that vibrated my teeth. Papers were scattered on the table, yellowed logs, dated 1983. Broadcast won't stop. Voices not ours. They're in the signal. One page, torn and smudged, listed names, dozens scratched out in black ink. At the bottom, they won out. My flashlight died then, the dark slamming down, and I heard footsteps above, slow and deliberate, circling the hatch. I ran, tripped up the stairs, my shin banging concrete, and burst out. No one, just the tower, its rust glowing faintly blue under a sliver of moon, the hum pulsing like a living thing. I told Sheriff Hanks next day. Big guy, broad shoulders, skeptical squint, but he humored me. Drove out with me in his cruiser, the radio crackling with static. The hatch was shut, locked tight, no sign of my break-in. The dirt smooth like it had been raked. He shrugged, boots scuffing the ground, said I'd been working too hard, stressed maybe, but his hands tightened on his belt when the radio, still in my truck, busted, crackled. "Hanks, they're watching." His face went pale, his jaw clenching, and he said nothing, just nodded curtly and drove us back, fast, the cruiser's tires spitting gravel. That night, my trailer shook, not wind. The trees outside still as death, and the voices came to the walls, no radio needed. "Cal, help us!" Cal run. Overlapping, pleading, threatening, a chorus of whispers that clawed at my skull. I grabbed my keys, drove to the diner, slept in my truck in the lot, the neon sign buzzing overhead, its pink glow flickering like a warning. February brought worse. The hum spread, audible from Main Street now, a low drone that rattled windows, set dogs pacing. People started leaving, first the Millers, then the Garretts, loading U-Hauls in the dead of night. No goodbyes. Lights dimmed town-wide, a slow bleed, like the power was draining somewhere else. Ellie swore she saw figures on her gas station security cam. Blurry, tall, moving slow across the pumps, vanishing mid-frame. Pete found the store's back door unlocked, a coil of wire missing, no footprints. Tommy's mom said he wouldn't sleep, kept drawing the tower, scribbling blue lines over it, muttering about the cold ones. I found a tape at the garage, wedged in a toolbox I hadn't touched in years, labeled Test 1983 in faded marker. Played on an old deck, the audio hissing, screams static, then a man panicked. We didn't mean to trap them. Shut it down, shut it. Cut off mid-word, replaced by a whine that made my ears bleed. I stopped sleeping right, my eyes burning, my hands shaking, my weight dropping, shirt hanging loose, ribs showing when I caught my reflection. Ray vanished. Motel said he checked out, left no trace. His room empty but for cigarette butts and a scribbled note. They found me. Hanks patrols the tower now. Gun drawn, won't talk, just nod when I pass, his face tight. I went back last week, March 10th. Couldn't resist. Crowbar, tape recorder, a thermos of coffee gone cold. The hatch was open, the generator screaming, the room icy, frost rhyming the walls. More papers, schematics, a map of the tower circled, a memo. Project Echo, terminated 1983. Containment breached. Footsteps again, above, and a shadow, tall, thin, edges blurry, crossed the hatch's mouth. I yelled, voice hoarse. Who are you? No answer. Just a whisper from the recorder, unplugged. Cal, we're free. I ran. The towers shaking the ground. Blue light pulsing in my rear view as I sped away. It's March 13th, 2025, and I'm done. Town's unraveling. Half the house is dark. The diner near empty. The hum a constant roar now, rattling my teeth from a mile off. Voices follow me. My name, their pleas, their threats. Through walls, radios, the wind itself. I'm writing this in my truck, parked by the silos, the tower looming, its rust glowing blue, a beacon I can't escape. I've lost 15 pounds. Sleep's a memory. My hands tremble. My eyes blur. Hanks won't answer calls. Ellie's packing to leave. Pete's bored at his shop. Tommy's drawings are pinned to the diner wall. Towers, blue lines, stick figures with no faces. The voices say I open something, let them out. And I don't know if they're ghost signals, prisoners of some failed experiment, or worse. I'm going back tonight, armed with the crowbar, the tape, a shotgun from my dad's old safe. I'll end it or understand it, blow the generator, burn the papers, something. If I don't update this, assume I didn't make it. Harrow's Bend isn't mine anymore. It's theirs, and I'm the idiot who woke them up. The key to a lock I never should have turned. I pulled up the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked driveway. My beat-up hatchback groaned as I killed the engine, and I sat there for a minute, staring at the place. It was old, older than I'd expected from the blurry photos online. The wooden siding was weathered, peeling in spots, and the windows looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. Still, it was mine now. Well, rented. Anyway, a fresh start after the divorce. New town, new job, knew me, right? I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my sneakers. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and something sour I couldn't place. The house creaked as a gust of wind swept through, like it was exhaling after holding its breath all day. I shook my head. Old houses make noises. That's normal. Inside, it wasn't much better. The living room had faded wallpaper with a floral pattern that looked straight out of the 70s, and the floorboards groaned with every step. There was a musty smell, like wet cardboard, lingering in the air. I dropped my bag by the stairs and flicked on the lights. They buzzed faintly before settling. The realtor had left a note on the kitchen counter. Welcome. Furnace is finicky. Give it a kick if it acts up. Great. I spent the evening unpacking what little I brought. A couple boxes of clothes, some books, a coffee maker. The furniture was already here. Left by the last tenant, I guessed. An old couch with sagging cushions. A scratched-up dining table. A bed with a lumpy mattress. It'd do for now. I started my job at the hardware store on Monday, and I just needed to get through the weekend. Around 9, I met the neighbor. I was hauling a trash bag out front when a voice called over the sagging fence. You the new tenant? I turned to see a wiry guy in his 50s, leaning on a rake. His name was Ed, he said, and he'd lived next door for 20 years. Yeah, just moved in today. I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. Name Sam. Ed nodded. I in the house. Good luck with that place. Been empty a while. Last folks didn't stay long. Oh. I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. Why is that? He hesitated, then shrugged. Dunno. They were weird about it. Said they heard stuff. Footsteps, voices. One night, the guy ran out screaming, babbling about curses. Cops picked him up a mile down the road. Never came back. Ed smirked like it was a joke, but his eyes didn't match the grin. Old houses, though. People make up stories. I forced a laugh. Yeah, probably just the wind. Probably, he echoed, but he didn't sound convinced. He waved goodnight and shuffled back to his porch. I went inside, locking the door behind me. The house was quiet now, save for the faint hum of the fridge. I climbed the creaky stairs to bed, brushing off Ed's story. Old houses settled. That's all it was. Still, as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows in the corners seemed a little too dark. I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It was deep and rhythmic, like someone dragging a heavy sack across the floor downstairs. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding against my ribs. The room was pitch black, the kind of dark that presses in on you. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. 2:47 a.m. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the faint creak of the house settling. I lay there, straining to hear it again, but all I got was silence. Too much silence, maybe. I told myself it was nothing. Old pipes, maybe, or the wind rattling something loose. I'd been jumpy since the divorce. New place, new noises, Ed's dumb story rattling around in my head. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tight, and forced my eyes shut. Sleep didn't come easy after that. Morning was better. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, making the house feel less like a crypt. I brewed coffee and ate a granola bar at the wobbly kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. The hardware store had texted about orientation Monday. 8 sharp. I'd need to figure out the bus schedule. Since my car was on its last legs, routine, that's what I needed. The day passed quietly. I unpacked the rest of my stuff, swept the floors, and even opened a window to air out that musty smell. It didn't help much. By dusk, I was wiped. I heated up a frozen pizza and ate it on the couch, the TV flickering with some old sitcom I didn't care about. The house felt normal enough, creaks and all. Then night fell again. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A low thud, like something heavy hitting the floor upstairs. I froze, toothbrush halfway in my mouth, listening. Nothing. I spat into the sink and wiped my face, telling myself it was a furnace. The realtor's note had said it was finicky. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my weight, and peeked into the bedroom. Empty. The mattress sat there, unmade, my duffel bag still unzipped by the wall. I shrugged it off and went to bed. Around 3, it happened again. This time it was footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth above me. I shot upright, breath caught in my throat. The ceiling creaked with each step, dust sifting down in the dim glow of my phone screen. I stared up, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. Back and forth, like someone or something was walking the attic. I grabbed the baseball that I'd unpacked earlier, an old relic from my college days, and crept to the hall. The attic hatch was at the far end, a square cutout in the ceiling with a pull cord dangling. The footsteps kept going, steady and unhurried. My mouth went dry. I reached for the cord, hands shaking, but then they stopped. Dead silence. I stood there, bat raised, staring at the hatch. Nothing moved. No sound. Just me in the dark. I didn't pull the cord. I backed into my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed, bat across my lap, until the sun came up. Old houses settle, I told myself, but I didn't believe it anymore. By Monday, I was a mess. I barely slept, and my eyes felt like they were lined with sandpaper. I dragged myself out of bed, splashed cold water on my face, and caught the 7:30 bus to the hardware store. The ride was bumpy. The seat smelled like stale cigarettes, but it was a distraction. Work was better. The manager, a gruff guy named Rick, walked me through inventory and cash register basics. It was mindless, stacking screws, ringing up paint cans, but it kept my head busy. I didn't tell anyone about the footsteps. What would I say? Hey, my creepy old house might be haunted. They'd laugh me out of the break room. So I smiled, nodded, and pretended everything was fine. By the time my shift ended at 4, I almost believed it myself. Almost. The bus dropped me off a block from the house. It loomed there, waiting, its windows catching the afternoon light like blank eyes. I hesitated at the gate, keys jingling in my hand. The air felt colder here, sharper. Even though the sun was still up, I shook it off and went inside. That night, I decided to ignore the noises. I cooked spaghetti on the ancient stove, the burners hissing like they resented being used. The TV blared loud enough to drown out the creaks. I ate, washed dishes, and scrolled to my phone. Normal stuff. Bedtime came, and I locked the bedroom door again, bat propped against the nightstand. If something was up there, I wasn't going to check. Not tonight. Sleep came in fits. I dreamed of footsteps endless pacing, and a shadow standing at the foot of my bed. I woke up sweaty, the room freezing despite the clunky radiator. My phone said 3:12 a.m. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone muttering under their breath. It wasn't coming from the attic this time. It was closer, right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. The whispers grew, overlapping, a jumble of voices too soft to make out. I gripped the bat and slid out of bed, floorboards cold under my feet. The doorknob rattled, once, twice, then went still. The whispers stopped. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the door. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no voices, just that heavy silence again. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up, lights on, waiting for dawn. When it came, I got ready for work like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't shake it. The feeling that something in this house was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I told myself it was stress. New job, new place. Ed's stupid story messing with me. That had to be it. On my way out, I ran into Ed raking leaves again. "You look like hell," he said, squinting at me. "Didn't sleep much." I muttered, "Old houses, you know." He nodded, slow and deliberate. "Yeah, they talk sometimes. You hear anything yet?" I forced a laugh. "Just creaks. Normal stuff." He didn't laugh back. "Keep an eye out, Sam. That place has got a way of getting under your skin." I walked to the bus stop, his words looping in my head. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Work was a blur. I fumbled through restocking shelves, my hands shaky from no sleep. Rick asked if I was okay, and I mumbled something about adjusting to the new place. He grunted and left me alone. By the time I got home, the sun was sinking again, painting the house in shades of orange and gray. I stood at the gate, staring at it. The whispers from last night clung to me like damp clothes. I didn't want to go in, but where else was I supposed to go? Inside, the air felt different, thicker, colder. I flipped on the lights, and they flickered before steadying. The musty smell was stronger now, mixed with something sharp like burnt matches. I headed to the kitchen, determined to keep things normal. I'd make dinner, watch TV, go to bed. Routine would fix this. I was halfway through boiling water for pasta when I felt it. A cold spot. It hit me like I'd walked into a wall of ice right by the stove. My breath puffed out in a little cloud, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I stepped back, then forward again. The cold was gone. Just the usual stale warmth of the house. I laughed, a shaky sound. Drafts? Old houses have drafts. Dinner was quiet, the TV muttering in the background. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting to see something standing there. Nothing did. I washed my plate, locked the doors, and headed upstairs. The bat stayed by my bed. I wasn't taking chances. Sleep didn't come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the footsteps or whispers. Around midnight, I heard a new sound, a slow, scraping noise, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the walls, faint but steady, moving from one side of the room to the other. I sat up, clutching the bat. The scraping stopped, then started again, louder, closer. It was in the wall behind my headboard now. I jumped out of bed and pressed my ear to the plaster. The sound was clear, scritch, 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 like something clawing its way through. I banged the wall with my fist, and it stopped. Silence. My pulse thumped in my ears. Mice, I told myself. Old houses have mice, but it didn't feel like mice. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch downstairs, lights blazing, until the sky lightened. The house was quiet again, like it was holding its breath. I got ready for work, moving slow, my head foggy. On my way out, I noticed something odd. The front door was unlocked. I'd locked it last night. I was sure of it. At the bus stop, Ed was there, waiting for his ride at the gas station where he worked. He took one look at me and frowned. "You hear it yet, don't you?" "Hear what?" I snapped, sharper than I meant. He didn't flinch. "The house. It talks. It moves. Folks before you heard it too." "It's just creaks," I said. Old pipes, mice, whatever. He shook his head. Keep telling yourself that, Sam. But you'll see. The bus pulled up, and I climbed on, his words gnawing at me. I didn't want to see anything. I just wanted to sleep. Work dragged. I spilled a box of nails, miscounted a customer's change, and got a warning look from Rick. I couldn't focus. The scraping, the cold spot, the unlocked door, all piled up in my head. By the time I got home, I was done pretending. Something was wrong with this house. I needed answers. I started in the basement. The realtor had shown it to me quick. Damp concrete, rusty furnace, a few boxes of junk. I hadn't cared then. Now, I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the rickety stairs. The air was wet and heavy. The burnt match smelled stronger. The furnace ticked like a heartbeat. I swept the light around, looking for anything. Old newspapers, photos, something to explain Ed's stories. In the corner, under a tarp, I found a wooden chest. It was small, scratched up, with a rusty latch that popped open with a tug. Inside was a mess of papers, bills, receipts, a faded photo of a stern-looking man in a suit, and a journal, leather-bound, edges frayed, pages yellowed. I flipped it open. The handwriting was tight, slanted, dated in 1923. October 12th. The rituals are working. The veil thins. I hear them now, beyond the walls. They whisper my name. I stopped, my stomach twisting. Rituals? I kept reading. October 15th. The house shifts at night. Doors open on their own. The cold comes. They want in. I must finish the circle. The entries went on, frantic, rambling about symbols, candles, something called the threshold. The last one was undated, just a scrawl. They're here. I opened it. God help me. I closed the journal, hands trembling. The man in the photo had to be the original owner. Ed's story about curses didn't sound so crazy now. I stuffed the journal in my pocket and climbed back upstairs, the basement air clinging to me. That night, I read more. The owner, Elias Crane, had been obsessed with the occult. He'd built the house, poured his life into it, believing it sat on some kind of spiritual fault line. He wrote about voices, shadows, things crossing over. The last pages were smeared illegible, like he'd written them in a panic. I didn't hear footsteps that night. I heard breathing, slow, raspy, right outside my door. I locked it, shoved the dresser against it, and sat there, bat in hand, listening. It didn't stop until dawn. When I checked, the hall was empty, but the air was ice cold and the burnt smell was everywhere. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Elias Crane had done something to this house. Something that never left. And now it was waking up. I couldn't shake the breathing from the night before. It clung to me like damp rot, seeping into every quiet moment. Work was out of the question. I called in sick, my voice hoarse and unconvincing over the phone. Rick muttered something about not making a habit of it, but I barely heard him. My head was back in that house, with its cold spots and locked doors, and that damn journal burning a hole in my pocket. I needed to know what Elias Crane had done, what he'd left behind. The house felt different when I stepped inside that morning. The air was heavier, like it was pressing down on me, and that burnt match smell was sharper, stinging my nose. Sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, but it didn't reach the corners. They stayed dark, thick with shadows that seemed to pulse if I stared too long. I told myself it was exhaustion playing tricks. 2 nights of no sleep will do that to you. But deep down, I knew better. I started in the living room. The floral wallpaper peeled to the edges, curling like dead skin, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. I'd noticed one near the fireplace. Sounded hollow when I'd walked over before, different from the others, less solid. I grabbed a screwdriver from my duffel bag, the one I'd used to fix a wobbly chair leg yesterday, and knelt down. The board was loose, its nails rusted and bent. I wedged the screwdriver under it, prying until it popped free with a dry crack. Dust billowed up, making me cough, and cobwebs clung to my fingers as I brushed them aside. Underneath was a shallow hollow, and in it, a small metal box, no bigger than a paperback. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The box was cold, its surface pitted with rust, and the lid screeched when I forced it open. Inside was a key, old, tarnished brass, heavier than it looked, and a scrap of yellowed paper folded in half. I unfolded it, my breath catching. A symbol stared back at me. A circle crossed with jagged, uneven lines, like something clawed through it. I'd seen it before. I dug the journal out of my pocket, flipped to a page near the middle. There it was, sketched in Elias's tight scrawl, labeled the seal. My stomach twisted into a knot. What the hell had he sealed? And why was the key hidden here? I sat back on my heels, staring at the key in my palm. It felt wrong, like it was humming faintly against my skin. I told myself it was my imagination, but the house didn't help. A creak came from upstairs, slow, deliberate, like a foot pressing down. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. Just the wind, I thought. Old houses settle. But my pulse wouldn't slow, and the shadows in the room felt thicker now, pooling in the corners like spilled ink. I shoved the key and paper into my pocket, next to the journal, and stood up. I needed to keep moving, keep busy, or I'd lose it. I checked the kitchen next. Nothing but chipped cabinets and a fridge that hummed too loud. The basement crossed my mind, but I wasn't ready for that yet. Not after the breathing. Instead, I paced the living room, running my hands through my hair, trying to think. Elias had been obsessed with the occult. That much was clear. Rituals, voices, thresholds. What did it all mean? And why was this house still standing if something had gone so wrong? Night came too fast. I'd meant to leave the lights on all day, keep the dark at bay, but the sun sank anyway, and the house swallowed the last of the light. I sat on the couch, the sagging cushions creaking under me, and turned on the TV. Static fizzed across the screen before settling on some late-night infomercial. Smiling people selling knives I'd never buy. It was noise, something to fill the silence. I kept the back close, leaning against the armrest, and tried to focus on the screen, but my eyes kept drifting to walls. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved. Not fast, not a flicker, but a slow, deliberate slide across the wallpaper, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. It didn't match the TV's glow, or the dim lamp in the corner. I blinked hard, thinking it was a trick of tired eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. My chest loosened, and I let out a shaky laugh. See? Nothing. Just my head screwing with me. Then it happened again. This time, it was by the stairs, a shape tall and thin, like a person stretched out of proportion. It glided toward the hallway, silent, and vanished around the corner. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the bat and stood, legs wobbly. "Hello," I called, my voice cracking. No answer. The house was still, but the air turned sharp cold, like I'd opened a freezer door. I stepped toward the stairs, bat raised, and peered into the dark. Nothing moved. No sound, no shadow. Just that heavy silence pressing in. The whispers started then. Soft at first, like a radio tuned too low. They grew into a jumble of voices, muttering, overlapping, coming from upstairs. My skin prickled. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct screamed to run out the front door and keep going. But I had to know. I'd found the key, the symbol, whatever was happening. It was tied to Elias, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The stairs creaked under me, each step louder than the last. The whispers got sharper, angrier, but I couldn't make out words. At the top, the hall stretched out, black as pitch. The light bulb there had been fine yesterday. Now it was dead. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket, clicked it on. The beam shook in. My hand, cutting through the dark. I swung it toward my bedroom door, half open like I'd left it. Something darted across the frame. A shadow, quick and low, disappearing inside. My mouth went dry. I gripped the bat tighter and crept forward, the floorboards groaning with every step. The whispers were everywhere now, bouncing off the walls, buzzing in my ears. I reached the doorway and shone the light in. The room looked normal. Bed unmade, duffel bag slumped by the wall, dresser where I'd left it. But the air was wrong, buzzing like static, and the shadows didn't sit right. They twisted, stretched, even with the flashlight steady. Then I saw the dresser move. Not much, just an inch, scraping the floor, but I hadn't touched it. I'd shoved it against the door last night, and now it was back by the wall. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed up, flashlight darting around. The whisper stopped, sudden and total, replaced by a low hum. It wasn't loud, but I felt it vibrating in my chest, my bones, like the house itself was growling. I checked the attic hatch down the hall. Still closed, the cord dangling limp. Whatever was here, it wasn't up there now. It was in this room, or the hall, or right behind me. I spun around, light slashing the dark. Nothing, just a hum, steady and deep, and that cold sinking into my skin. I didn't sleep that night. I stumbled back downstairs, locked myself in the kitchen, and sat at the table with the key, the journal, and the bat in front of me. The hum faded at some point, but the shadows stayed thick, watching. I kept the lights on, every single one, until the sun came up. Even then, I didn't feel safe. The house was awake now, and it knew I was digging. Whatever Elias had started, it wasn't finished. Morning didn't bring relief. The house was quiet, sure, but it was a kind of quiet that feels like a trap, like something's holding its breath, waiting for you to slip. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold in my mug, staring at the key and the journal. The symbol, the seal, kept looping in my head. Elias had locked something away, or tried to. That room in the basement, the one I hadn't explored yet, kept tugging at me. I didn't want to go down there. The breathing, the growls. It all started after I poked around last time, but I couldn't sit here forever, jumping at shadows. I had to know. I grabbed the flashlight, the bat, and the key, my hands slick with sweat. The basement door was at the end of the hall, painted the same faded beige as the walls, blending in unless you knew where to look. I'd only been down there once with a realtor, and she'd rushed me through it. Damp concrete, rusty furnace, a few boxes of junk. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now, every step toward that door felt like wading through mud. The knob was cold, stiff, like it hadn't been turned in years. I pushed it open, and the hinges screamed loud enough to make me wince. A blast of wet, heavy air hit me, thick with that burnt match smell, stronger than ever. It burned my throat as I flicked on the flashlight and started down. The stairs were narrow, wooden, and uneven, creaking under my sneakers. Halfway down, I stopped listening. Nothing but the faint tick of the furnace and my own breathing, shallow and quick. The basement stretched out in the flashlight's beam, gray walls slick with moisture, a cracked floor, the hulking shape of the furnace in the corner. I swung the light around, looking for anything that matched the journal. The boxes I'd seen before were still there, stacked haphazardly against the far wall, their cardboard sagging and stained. I started toward them, then froze. Something glinted in the shadows behind them, a thin line of metal, catching the light. I moved closer, heart thudding. The boxes were heavier than they looked, damp and crumbling as I shoved them aside. Behind them was a door, narrow, wooden, painted over so many times it blended into the wall. A keyhole sat at chest height, small and dark, the perfect match for the key in my pocket. My breath hitched. This wasn't in the realtor's tour. Elias hadn't mentioned in the journal, not directly, but the threshold kept echoing in my mind. This had to be it. I pulled the key out, its weight dragging at my hand. The air down here was thicker now, pressing against my chest, and the burnt smell was choking like sulfur and ash. I slid the key into the lock, my fingers trembling so bad I almost dropped it. It fit too well like it belonged there. I turned it slow and the lock clicked, a sharp, final sound that echoed off the concrete. The door creaked open an inch, then stopped. I hesitated, bat in one hand, flashlight in the other. Every nerve screamed to turn back, but I pushed it open. The room was small, maybe 10 feet square, with bare concrete walls and no windows. The floor wasn't concrete. It was dirt, packed hard and uneven, like it had been dug out by hand. In the center was a circle of stones, fist-sized and rough, arranged with precision. Inside the circle, carved into the dirt, was a symbol from the paper. The seal, jagged lines cutting through a perfect ring. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming for a second before steadying. The air buzzed, a faint electric hum that crawled up my spine. I stepped inside, and the cold hit me like a slap. My breath fogged, curling in front of me, and my teeth started chattering. The room didn't feel empty. It felt crowded, like invisible eyes were boring into me. I swung the flashlight around, shadows jumping on the walls. Something moved in the corner, a flicker, dark and shapeless, gone when I focused the light there. My pulse spiked. "Who's there?" I croaked, voice barely above a whisper. No answer, just that hum growing louder, vibrating in my skull. The whisper started then, sharp, urgent, bouncing off the walls like a dozen people talking at once. I couldn't make out words, just a rising tide of sound, angry and desperate. I backed toward the door, bat raised, but the cold tightened around me, squeezing my chest. The flashlight flickered again, and in that split second of darkness, I saw it, a shadow tall and twisted, standing in the circle. When the light came back, it was gone. I stumbled out, slamming the door behind me. The lock clicked as I jammed the key in and turned it, my hands shaking so bad I fumbled twice. The whispers followed me, muffled now, seeping through the wood. I dropped the key, cursed, and snatched it up, the metal biting into my palm. My flashlight beam danced as I ran upstairs, the stairs groaning under me. I burst into the kitchen, slammed the basement door, and locked it too, shoving a chair under the knob for good measure. The whispers faded, but my heart wouldn't slow. I sank into a chair, bat across my lap, staring at the door. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Whatever was behind that locked door, it wasn't just a story anymore. Elias had opened something, and it was still here waiting. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't leave it alone. Not now. That night, the footsteps came back. Heavy, deliberate, thudding down the stairs one by one. I locked myself in my room, shoved the dresser against the door again, and sat on the bed, bat in hand. They stopped outside, and the doorknob turned slow, steady, like someone testing it. The lock held, but the breathing started, raspy and close, right on the other side. It didn't stop until dawn, a long, endless exhale that drilled into my head. When I checked the hall at sunrise, it was empty, but the air was ice cold, and that burnt smell lingered like a stain. I was done pretending. 3 nights of no sleep, shadows moving, whispers in the walls. I couldn't keep telling myself it was a house settling or mice or stress. The journal, the key, that room. It was real, and it was breaking me. I needed help. Someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. Ed was the only one who might listen. I grabbed the journal and stumbled out the front door, the morning sun harsh against my bloodshot eyes. The air outside was crisp normal, a stark contrast to the suffocating weight inside the house. Ed was on his porch, smoking a cigarette, the smoke curling up in lazy spirals. He looked up as I crossed the yard, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Jesus, Sam, you're pale as a ghost," he said, flicking ash into a chipped ashtray. "What's wrong with you?" "I found something," I said, my voice raw. I held out the journal, hands trembling. Elias Crane, he lived here. He did rituals, Ed. There's a room in the basement, locked up with some kind of circle. Something's in the house. I've been hearing it, seeing it. I don't know what to do. He took the journal, his fingers rough against the leather, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, narrowing as he read. The cigarette dangled from his lips, forgotten, until ash dropped onto his knee. He brushed it off absently, his face tightening. "Crane," he muttered, "knew that name. Old bastard owned this place way back. Folks said he went missing. Nobody knew why. House sat empty, till the bank took it over. Never heard about rituals, though." He paused, looking up at me. But the tenants, they talked. Every one of them said the same thing. Footsteps at night, voices when they were alone. One lady swore something grabbed her arm in the dark, left bruises. She moved out the next day. That guy I told you about, the one who ran screaming, he kept yelling about curses, said the house was alive. Cops thought he was drunk, but I saw his face. He wasn't lying. Why didn't you tell me all this before? I snapped, anger flaring through the exhaustion. You let me move in knowing that? Ed didn't flinch. Didn't think you believed me till you saw it for yourself. Most folks don't. They hear the stories, laugh it off, say it's just an old house. Then they leave. Or worse. He handed the journal back, his eyes steady on mine. You should get out, Sam. That place ain't right. Never has been. I can't just leave, I said, pacing the porch. I've got no money, no place to go. The divorce cleaned me out. This job, this house, it's all I got left. He sighed, long and heavy, stubbing out a cigarette. Then burn that damn book. Lock that room and don't touch it. Whatever Crane did, it's still there, and you're stirring it up. Leave it alone or it'll take you too. I nodded, but my mind was spinning. Burn the journal? Lock the room? I'd already opened the door, seen the shadow. It wasn't going to let me walk away that easy. I thanked Ed, my voice hollow, and trudged back to the house. It loomed there, waiting, its windows dark despite the morning light. I went inside, locked the basement door again, and wedged the dining table against it this time. The chair hadn't felt like enough. The day dragged on, quiet and tense. I stayed upstairs, avoiding the basement, the journal sitting unopened on my nightstand. I tried to nap, but every creak jolted me awake. By dusk, I was pacing again, bat in hand, jumping at shadows. Night fell, and the noises started, scraping in the walls, footsteps on the stairs, the whispers weaving through it all. Then a new sound cut through, a low growl, deep and guttural, rising from the basement. I froze, listening as it rolled up through the floorboards, vibrating the house. It wasn't an animal, not a dog, or a raccoon trapped down there. It was bigger, angrier, and it knew I was here. The growl grew louder, closer, clawing its way up the stairs. I ran to my room, locked the door, and shoved the dresser against it, my arms burning from the effort. The growling stopped at the hall, replaced by heavy thuds, something pounding the basement door below. I sat on the bed, bat across my lap, sweat soaking my shirt. The thuds kept coming, steady and relentless, shaking the walls. The whispers joined in, chanting now, a rhythm I couldn't escape. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. They were inside my head. The pounding stopped at dawn, sudden and total, leaving that suffocating silence. I didn't move for an hour, waiting for it to come back. It didn't, but the house felt different, like it was grinning, biding its time. Hashtag chapter 9. The thing in the dark. I didn't go to work anymore. I couldn't. The growls, the shadows, the whispers, they'd stripped me bare. I was a shell, jumping at every sound, seeing shapes in every corner. Rick left a voicemail firing me after I missed another shift. His voice sharp and final. I didn't care. The job didn't matter. The house did. It had me now, and I couldn't shake it. I spent the day on the couch, curtains drawn, the journal open in my lap. I needed a way out, some clue to undo what Elias had started. His entries rambled about closing the circle, reversing the ritual, but the pages were smeared, ink bleeding into nonsense. I traced the words with my finger, willing them to make sense. He'd written about candles, blood, a chant, something to seal it back. But the details were gone, lost to time or his panic. I slammed the journal shut, cursing him. He'd opened this hell and left me to deal with it. The room in the basement gnawed at me. That circle, that shadow, I had to go back. If there was an answer, it was there. I waited until noon, when the sun was high, hoping daylight would keep it at bay. Flashlight, key, bat, I armed myself and headed down. The basement door stuck when I unlocked it, the table scraping the floor as I shoved it aside. The air hit me like a wave, cold, wet, reeking of sulfur and ash. The stairs creaked louder this time, each step a warning. The basement was darker than before, the furnace ticking like a dying clock. I swung the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the gloom. The boxes were still scattered where I'd left them, the narrow door waiting behind. My hand shook as I slid the key in, the lock clicking with a sound that echoed too long. I pushed the door open, slower this time, bracing myself. The room was the same, concrete walls, dirt floor, the circle of stones glaring up at me. But the symbol was different. The jagged lines were deeper, fresher, like something had clawed through the dirt since I'd last been here. My flashlight flickered, the hum in the air louder, buzzing in my teeth. I stepped inside, and the cold sank into me, numbing my fingers. The whispers started, soft and scattered, growing into a hiss that filled the room. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag chapter 9. The thing in the dark. I didn't go to work anymore. I couldn't. The growls, the shadows, the whispers, they'd strip me bare. I was a shell, jumping at every sound, seeing shapes in every corner. Rick left a voicemail firing me after I missed another shift. His voice sharp and final. I didn't care. The job didn't matter. The house did. It had me now, and I couldn't shake it. I spent the day on the couch, curtains drawn, the journal open in my lap. I needed a way out, some clue to undo what Elias had started. His entries rambled about closing the circle, reversing the ritual, but the pages were smeared, ink bleeding into nonsense. I traced the words with my finger, willing them to make sense. He'd written about candles, blood, a chant, something to seal it back. But the details were gone, lost to time or his panic. I slammed the journal shut, cursing him. He'd opened this hell and left me to deal with it. The room in the basement gnawed at me. That circle, that shadow, I had to go back. If there was an answer, it was there. I waited until noon, when the sun was high, hoping daylight would keep it at bay. Flashlight, key, bat. I armed myself and headed down. The basement door stuck when I unlocked it, the table scraping the floor as I shoved it aside. The air hit me like a wave, cold, wet, reeking of sulfur and ash. The stairs creaked louder this time, each step a warning. The basement was darker than before, the furnace ticking like a dying clock. I swung the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the gloom. The boxes were still scattered where I'd left them, the narrow door waiting behind. My hand shook as I slid the key in, the lock clicking with a sound that echoed too long. I pushed the door open, slower this time, bracing myself. The room was the same, concrete walls, dirt floor, the circle of stones glaring up at me. But the symbol was different. The jagged lines were deeper, fresher, like something had clawed through the dirt since I'd last been here. My flashlight flickered, the hum in the air louder, buzzing in my teeth. I stepped inside, and the cold sank into me, numbing my fingers. The whispers started, soft and scattered, growing into a hiss that filled the room. I moved closer to the circle, bat raised, flashlight steady. The dirt inside was disturbed, scratches, smudges like something had crawled out. Then I saw it, in the corner where the shadows were thickest, a shape, tall, hunched, too many limbs twisting together. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. Its eyes glinted. 2 pinpricks of light in the dark locked on me. My breath stopped. The whispers turned to screams, a wall of sound crashing over me, and the thing lunged. I swung the bat hard, but it hit nothing. Air, just air. The shape dissolved, reappearing by the circle, closer now. I stumbled back, flashlight dropping, the beam spinning wild across the walls. The screams peaked, deafening, and I ran. My shoulder slammed the doorframe, pain flaring, but I kept going, yanking the door shut. It locked on its own, the key still inside, clattering to dirt as the mechanism snapped. I scrambled upstairs, the screams chasing me, fading as I reached the kitchen. I shoved the table back against the basement door, then the couch, piling anything I could move. The growls started again, deep and furious, shaking the floor. I sank against the wall, bats slipping from my hands, and listened as they pounded up the stairs, clawing at the barricade. The wood groaned, splintering, but it held, just barely. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The thing was out now, loose in the basement, and it knew my name. The whispers kept going, soft and taunting, weaving through the growls. I sat there, staring at the barricade, waiting for it to break through. It didn't, not that night, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The house wasn't just alive, it was angry. I felt it the next day, a pressure building the walls, the air, my skull. The barricade held, but the growls didn't stop. They rumbled to the floor, a constant threat. I stayed upstairs, pacing my room, The journal clutched like a lifeline. The shadows were worse now, stretching, twisting, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. Hands reached from the corners, faces pressed against the wallpaper, eyes blinking in the dark. I blinked back, and they were gone, but the afterimage burned. The whispers turned into a chant. Sam, Sam, Sam. Over and over, a rhythm that drilled into me. I couldn't shut it out. I tried the TV, cranking the volume, but the sound warped, bending into the same chant. I yanked the plug, and the screen went black, reflecting a shadow behind me that wasn't mine. I spun around. Nothing, just the empty room, cold and buzzing. I had to end it. The journal was my only shot. I tore through it again, page by page, looking for anything I'd missed. Elias had written about the seal, the circle, closing it. But how? The smudged pages mocked me, their secrets locked away. Then I saw it, a sketch on the last legible page, the symbol from the basement, caption burn to bind. Burn it. That was it. Fire to seal it shut. I ripped the page out, hands shaking, and grabbed a match from the kitchen. The whispers surged, angry now as I struck it. The flame flared, bright and hot, and I held the paper to it. The edges curled, blackening, and the chanting stopped. Silence, sharp and sudden. Then a scream ripped through the house, inhuman, furious, shaking the walls. The flame died, snuffed out by a gust of cold air, and the door downstairs burst open. I ran to the hall, peering down. The barricade was gone, table and couch flung aside like toys. Cold air flooded up, carrying that burnt smell, and the shadows came alive. They swarmed the stairs, clawing at the air, reaching for me. I bolted to my room, locked the door, but it didn't matter. Though it splintered, the knob rattling, and the thing broke through. It wasn't just a shadow now. It was solid, tall, twisted, limbs bending wrong, eyes glowing, a face that wasn't a face. It moved fast, too fast, and the cold hit me like a wave. I swung the bat, missed, and ran down the hall, down the stairs, through the living room. The shadows grabbed at me, tearing my shirt, my skin, but I didn't stop. I hit the front door, fumbled the lock, and stumbled into the night. The street was quiet, the air warm against my clammy skin. I turned back, chest heaving. The house sat there, dark and still, lights off, windows blank. But I heard it, a whisper, faint and clear, calling my name. It wasn't over. I ran, legs burning, until I couldn't see the house anymore, the whisper fading but never gone. I didn't go back. I crashed at a motel that night, a dingy place off the highway, paying with the last of my cash. The room smelled like mildew and cheap cleaner, but it was better than the house. I sat on the lumpy bed, journal beside me, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Every creak of the building, every hum of the neon sign outside made me jump. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The thing's eyes, those glowing pinpricks, stayed with me, burned into my head. Morning came, gray and slow. I showered, the hot water doing nothing for the cold lodge in my bones, and headed to Ed's. He was in his yard, raking leaves, and did look surprised when I showed up, wild-eyed and shaking. "You saw it," he said, leaning on the rake. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I croaked. "It got out." I ran. "I can't go back. Ed, let me stay here, just one night, please." He nodded, slow and grim. "One night, but that house, it don't let go easy." I spent the day on his couch, sipping lukewarm coffee he'd brewed, trying to piece myself together. Ed didn't ask much, just watched me with those steady eyes, like he'd seen this before. Night fell, and I took the spare room, a cramped space with a single bed and a cracked window. I locked the door, propped a chair on the knob, and lay down, fully clothed, bat beside me. I woke to footsteps, slow, heavy, pacing outside the window. My eyes snapped open, heart racing. The room was dark, the clock glowing 3:14 a.m. I crept to the window, peeled back the curtain. The house across the fence stared back, its lights flickering on and off, though I'd cut the breaker before I left. A shadow moved inside, tall, wrong, gliding past the windows. It stopped, turned, and looked at me, Those eyes gleamed, cutting through the night, locking on mine. I dropped the curtain, stumbling back. The footsteps circled the house, steady and close, tapping the walls. Ed didn't wake. He snored through it, oblivious. I sat on the bed, bat in hand, listening as they paced until dawn. When the sun rose, they stopped, and the house went dark again. I didn't tell Ed. He wouldn't have believed me, or maybe he would have, and that was worse. I left town that day. Ed drove me to the bus station, silent the whole way, his hands tight on the wheel. I bought a ticket to nowhere, just away, 3 states over, where a friend from college said I could crash on his couch. Burn that house down, I told Ed as I climbed out. He didn't answer, just stared at the road. Weeks later, I'm trying to start over. New job at a warehouse, lifting boxes until my back aches, living in a friend's spare room with mismatched sheets and a leaky window. I tell myself it's fine, it's normal, but I don't sleep much. The whispers come back sometimes, faint and far off, waking me in the dark. Footsteps too, soft, deliberate, like they're testing the floor. I check the locks twice, keep the lights on, tell myself it's the neighbors or the wind. The journal's gone. I threw it in a dumpster outside the motel, watched it sink into the trash, but it doesn't matter. I feel it's still that cold, that weight. Last night, I woke up freezing, my breath foggy in the air. The room was empty, the door locked, but the floor creaked. Once, twice, closer each time. I held my breath, waiting. It stopped and the cold faded, but I didn't move until sunrise. I don't know if it followed me or if it's still there, in that house, waiting for the next tenant. Maybe both. All I know is I'll never stop running. Never stop listening for those whispers in the dark. They know my name, and they're not done.